half of them have murdered more than one person. People come in from gangs, from prisons. They emptied out Venezuela, emptied out its prisons.
Have you been backing away from this, though? Because recently you said, let's ease up on, taking in people who are working, hardworking, like in farms and hotels.
I don't back away. What I do I cherish our farmers. And when we go into a farm and we take away people that have been working there for 15 and 20 years who are good, who possibly came in incorrectly, and what we're going to do is we're going to do something for farmers where we can let the farmer sort of be in charge. The farmer knows he's not going to hire a murderer. But, when you go into a farm and he's had somebody working with him for 9 years doing this kind of work, which is hard work to do, and a lot of people aren't going to do it, and you end up destroying a farmer because you took all the people away, it's a problem. I'm on both sides of the thing. I'm the strongest immigration guy that there's ever been, but I'm also the strongest farmer guy that there's ever been. And that includes also hotels and, places where people work, a certain group of people work. So we're working on it right now. We're going to work it so that some kind of a temporary pass where people pay taxes, where the farmer can have a little control as opposed to you walk in and take everybody away. But no, the criminals are going out of this country.
Right. You said it from the beginning. You wanted to first focus on the criminals. But I'm wondering if this change in giving people a pass is a response to the critics who said the execution was a little clumsy. People were afraid to go to work. They were afraid to run into ICE. They said, look, if you give a quota to somebody and say, go get me 600 people who are here in the country illegally, they'll come back with 600 people, even if it's not the right 600.
So the execution was unbelievable because you have no people coming through our border anymore. Right. That's part of the execution. So it wasn't clumsy. What was clumsy is the fact that they allowed millions and millions of people to pour into our country. Take a look at some of the scenes. It's on your show all the time, where thousands of people are trying to bust through a wall. They literally break down walls. There's so many people.
This is so important, especially in the context of Trump constantly praising himself. Oh, Mr. Trump, says Mr. Trump, you're so fantastic for what he did for North Carolina. Donald Trump rejected their FEMA funds, stating that your political disagreement alone is your justification for not sending federal funds to New York City. Is exactly the type of fear-mongering Donald Trump tried to paint Joe Biden in. He ran exclusively a presidential campaign calling out falsely weaponization of government against him. And now he's weaponizing the government against all of his enemies for very petty reasons. And it's why we see the threats continue when Democrats speak out like Sarah Jacobs did right here. And what she said is incredibly important.
What did you make of the New York Democrat primary? I'm Donnie.
He's a communist. I think it's very bad for New York. I don't know that he's going to get in. It's inconceivable that but he's a communist, and he's a pure communist. I think he admits it, but I can't imagine it. But let's say this. If he does get in, I'm going to be president, and he's going to have to do the right thing, or they're not getting any money. He's got to do the right thing. It's shocking that I would have assumed that I used to say we will never have a socialist in this country. No, but we'll have a communist. I mean, he's a communist and going to be mayor of New York. So I was very surprised when I said, I never heard of him. I don't know who he is.
This is so important, especially in the context of Trump constantly praising himself. Oh, Mr. Trump, says Mr. Trump, you're so fantastic for what he did for North Carolina. Donald Trump rejected their FEMA funds, stating that your political disagreement alone is your justification for not sending federal funds to New York City. Is exactly the type of fear-mongering Donald Trump tried to paint Joe Biden in. He ran exclusively a presidential campaign calling out falsely weaponization of government against him. And now he's weaponizing the government against all of his enemies for very petty reasons. And it's why we see the threats continue when Democrats speak out like Sarah Jacobs did right here. And what she said is incredibly important.
Let's go to Iran now, because the Trump administration limited the classified information that it shared with Congress. Did you leave that briefing convinced the strikes were as successful as the White House claims? And was the case made that the Iran threat was dire enough to justify military force without congressional approval? I'm curious if there are questions that still remain unanswered for you.
There are a lot of questions. I did not hear anything in that briefing that convinced me that Iran's nuclear program is destroyed. And I also did not hear anything that convinced me that this was any sort of imminent threat that would have required the president to make this unilateral decision without Congress. So I still have a lot of questions in terms of what the battle damage is, what they thought they were doing, what the strategy is. But fundamentally, this was a reckless decision that is going to make it harder to get any sort of diplomatic agreement. And if, there's nothing now that would stop the Iranians from secretly creating a nuclear weapon and then feeling like they're more protected because of the strike. Whereas before, we were able to see more about what was going on, and especially under the Iran deal, under the JCPOA, when we really were able to see what was happening and be able to monitor the situation.
This ceasefire between Iran and Israel, it appears to be holding. Iran's supreme leader warned against any further attacks. President Trump said the U.S. and Iran will hold nuclear talks next week, though Tehran has not confirmed that any talks are taking place. Are you surprised the truce has held so far? And do you think Iran will be open to negotiating a nuclear deal after these attacks?
I'm glad that the ceasefire is stable for now. I have family who lives in Israel. And so, they were sending me pictures from their bomb shelter during all of this, which is part of why I'm so against all of this, because it is the civilians in Iran and Israel who are paying the price for these reckless decisions by both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. And look, I hope that the diplomatic negotiations are successful and that they're able to get to a deal. However, I think these strikes actually made it less likely that they're going to, because between Donald Trump pulling out of the initial JCPOA Iran deal and then Donald Trump using the ruse of negotiations to trick them and then doing the strike instead, I don't see why the Iranians have any reason to trust or believe that any agreement they come to with us would actually be upheld.
So this nearly 1,000-page text of the bill, it was released just before midnight on Friday. And among some of the last-minute changes, a concession to GOP moderates that delays cuts to provider taxes that fund state Medicaid obligations. I'm curious your thoughts on the Senate's version of this legislation. Is it going to get any Democratic votes?
I don't think it will get any Democratic votes, because the fact of the matter is, while they made some changes to the provider taxes and it created a slush fund for rural hospitals because they know that this is really going to impact rural hospitals, it's still a bill that fundamentally guts Medicaid and SNAP and is going to make millions of people in our country less healthy and hungry. And that is not something that I think any Democrat will go for.
Give me a sense of what your constituents are saying about how they would be affected if this bill passes, and the number one concern that you're hearing from them.
Yeah, look, in San Diego, where I represent, 1 in 5 people rely on Medicaid for their health care.
Wow.
In fact, nationwide, 40% of all births rely on Medicaid for their coverage. Now, the Republicans claim to be a party that want us to have more babies. Well, 40% of all births rely on Medicaid, and yet they're gutting it. And so I've been talking to my constituents, and, I met Delilah, who's 5 years old. She has a number of different health conditions, and the only way that she can get the health care she needs is through Medicaid. Or 2-year-old Caesar, who has 20 to 30 medical appointments a month because of his medical conditions. And again, Medicaid is the only reason that his family is able to afford it. These are the real people who are going to be impacted by these cuts that Republicans are making.
Oof, boy, let that sink in, won't you?
So Congresswoman Jacobs feels like most Democrats do that we haven't gotten anywhere close to proper intelligence. At least elected members of Congress have it on Donald Trump's strike. Now, that's been painted by this White House because the Democrats are leaking. That's what they're saying. The Democrats are leaking this information. It's just not true. I think the guy who leaked war plans on Signal might be more responsible for that than Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden. But sure, continue to tell your narrative. But Donald Trump has gone so far in that delusion, so far in that lie, that he's now using it to threaten Democrats. Take a listen right here.
You tweeted the Democrats leaked intelligence.
They should be prosecuted.
Who specifically? Do we know
People
who did
that
it? Will you
leaked
be
it.
able to find
They
out?
can find out. If they wanted, they could find out easily. You know, you go up and tell the reporter, national security, who gave it. You have to do that. And I suspect we'll be doing things like that.
Thanks for watching this video. And if you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.